A dumpster at Kilgore College, old music scores, CDs, vinyl, and other priceless items from the college's music library. Those items were tossed by crews clearing a storage space at the Ann Dean Turk Performing Arts Center. Tonight, KLTV7's Avery Niles has the school's response and also spoke with a man who says he had to save as many of those items as he could since they hold historical significance to both the college and East Texas.
John Porter is an East Texas professional musician. He was tipped off by a contact that there was a dumpster filled with historical artifacts from the college's music library.
When I pulled up, I figured it was full of like students' belongings because, people move out at the end of the semester, various garbage, yada, yada. But then when I climbed up to look, I stared for like a good 20 seconds, just like, man, what?
Porter jumped into the dumpster to find thousands of priceless CDs, scores, and vinyl records.
A lot of these artifacts are first edition printings. Some are 100 years more in age. Not only this, but back in the mid-20th century, when the Kilgore College Music School was really booming, there were many visiting artists, such as Van Cliburn, that played and instructed there. And some of those instructors left their personal collections, recordings of theirs that were them, and autographs of scores that they had signed or even marked up.
Alexander Boggs Ryan and Ann Dean Turk's collection was also part of the library. Porter collected 3 carloads of items and posted his findings on Facebook. Sandra Seiler, retired KC piano department teacher, saw the post.
I almost had a heart attack. I could not believe, because I used that music. I used it every day.
Kilgore College released a statement reading in part, quote, "The majority of these pieces of older sheet music, CDs, or albums that were discarded have been in storage for a number of years. Many were left over from the old radio station or KC library and were no longer of use to the college or the music department due to the inception of new technology. The Fine Arts Department has been sorting through the collection this past year and has maintained a great deal of music, but from time to time these inventories need to be reduced to allow for the addition of new materials, new technologies, and new programs."
Yes, digital music is out there, but no symphony. None of the orchestra members are using digital music, so that is a horrible, horrible injustice.
I'm hoping that Kilgore will come back and say, we would like these back, we would like to reinstate these and put them in a museum.
Avery Niles, KLTV7 News.
And Porter says for now he's keeping safe all of what he collected.